Are helmets worth it? This is a question I've had for over 10,000 hours, but it's such a complicated and messy question to try to answer. What we currently have is the stats of helmets and bullets. We have the hitbox models straight from Nikita, and meticulous and detailed testing of the interaction between bullets and armor by content creators such as Airwing Marine. But how do we account for the wild unpredictability of live raids? A large-scale controlled experiment gathering data from live raids is the missing piece of the helmet puzzle. But before running an experiment, I had to figure out what we mean by worth when asking the question, are helmets worth it? Whether or not a helmet is worth it depends on the goal you're trying to accomplish. These are goals like speedrunning through quests, or if you're making money and only focused on the amount of rubles per hour you can make, or if you only care about surviving, or if you're just trying to farm as many PMCs as you can per hour and purely focusing on PvP, or if you're trying to farm AI for loot or maybe XP, you could be farming bosses, rogues, raiders, scavs, cultists even. It is impractical to test for all of the goals, so instead I decided to focus on a simpler question: will a helmet, on average, pay for itself? Now, math is not my strong suit, but if the cost is equal to or greater than 0 for a given helmet in the following formula, then it will have paid for itself. L is the loadout cost, and H is the helmet cost. Deaths is the number of deaths in your dataset, and this formula results in the cost of having ran a helmet. The actual formula is a tad more complicated, but I'll get more into that later in the video. Now we have a clearer idea of what the question is. How do we start getting good data to plug into the formula? The data needed is the cause of deaths in live raids, specifically the hitbox that I died to and the ammunition used to kill me. Using that information, we can estimate the likelihood a given helmet would have saved me had I been wearing it during that raid. However, due to the large number of variables at play in a Tarkov raid, I wanted a nice large sample size. Initially, I decided on gathering the data from 100 deaths, but then in patch 0.14.9.1, BSG changed armor hitboxes, so I decided to gather data from another 100 deaths for a total of 200 deaths so that the data is up to date with the current patch, and also to see how the patch affected the results. But the next problem is, in order for the data from each death to be realistic, we need to consider all the variables that could affect the hitbox I died to and the ammunition that was used. The variables I'll be controlling are the time of wipe. So for the first 100 deaths, I ran from the 20th of May to the 27th of May, and then for the second set of 100 deaths, I ran from the 14th of June to the 23rd of June. Because usually as the wipe progresses, ammo quality increases. And of course I ran each raid solo. I chose to do all the runs on factory because ammo quality will differ by map. For example, labs generally has a higher ammo quality than factory. And it was important to have a very specific playstyle and goal in each raid. Because you can imagine, if I was focusing on fighting AI and avoiding players, then the results would skew in favor of hitting ammo that AI uses, which at this point in the wipe is typically worse than what PMCs run, and vice versa. So I needed to control my playstyle and goal for each raid. So I had a very specific goal and playstyle, which is to push the forklift spawn via tunnels, then clear the forklift spawn, and then push to the office via tunnels, and hold any floor or stairs of the office until 16 minutes are left in the raid, at which point I would leave via gate 3. And I maintained a fairly aggressive playstyle. I also ran each raid on the servers OC and Asia. These are the only servers that I can connect to. I don't know if there are differences between servers, but I control this variable to be safe. Now for loadouts, I chose 4 specific loadouts and recorded the costs of each loadout of what they were pre-patch and post-patch. So pre-patch, the SF58 loadout costed me 662,000 rubles on average, P90 564,000, HK 947,000, and MP7 430,000. Then post-patch, SF58 was 766,000, P90 677,000, HK 921,800 rubles, and then MP7 was 592,720 rubles on average. There's some variability with the loadout costs as some of these items are from flea market, and so flea market fluctuates. I chose AACPC and monocleats for my armor because I wanted something that wasn't too good and wasn't too bad. Because if the armor was too good, then it sways the results in favor of deaths that avoid armor, and vice versa if the armor is too bad. So I felt like the AACPC and monocleats were like a good middle ground between terrible and good armor. And of course, I played only day raids on factory. There were a lot of variables that I had to ignore that I couldn't measure or control. For example, looting efficiency, the increased profit from being able to have an extra slot to loot a helmet, and the increased starting weight of loadouts of when you're running a helmet decreases the available weight for loot. Also, any looting income at all, and how increased weight negatively affects mobility and therefore PvPvE ability. Also, lost hearing due to some helmets not being able to use ears, and how that affects PvPvE. The increased visibility of your head when using some helmets, e.g. a tan ULAC standing a lot more out than a black ULAC, and decreased visibility when using some face shields, for example a masker, and how that affects your PvPvE ability. Decreased flashbang effect duration when using some face shields, and cheaters, and insurance, and some bullet interaction variables, such as the angle of shot onto the helmet and blunt damage. So if the helmet doesn't pen but the blunt damage is greater than 34, this scenario I had to ignore, I couldn't calculate it. And also the real time of day, for example playing on only peak times or only off-peak times. I meant to control this but I forgot, as well as I forgot to control whether I was playing on weekends only or weekdays, because usually you get a different number of players depending on what type of day you're playing. And I also ignored the differences between headsets, where running better headsets could have increased survivor rate but increased cost, so I wasn't able to consider that in my calculations. And also that some helmets block some headsets but not all, which means that the headsets that can be run with that helmet may not be optimal. In addition to the variables I had to ignore, I also made a few assumptions. The first assumption is that if I had survived the one headshot that I died to in the data, then I assume I'd have survived the rest of the raid. For example, if I've recorded a death by headshot, suppose I was instead running an Alton and survived that headshot, I assume that I'll survive the rest of the raid. My next assumption is that the game isn't broken, that the game is actually working properly, that the end of raid hitbox report is accurate, that hitboxes are working as intended, and that helmets and armor are working as intended, because there's not really any way that I can figure out how to include bugs into my calculations. And thirdly, in cases of ammunition that has multiple projectiles, for example buckshot, only one projectile is considered. And finally, I assume that the helmet that I would have ran is always at max durability. So when considering all of these variables, the original question has now been further refined from are helmets worth it to will a given helmet pay for itself on average when playing aggressive late wipe solo factory raids. So finally, onto the results. As I mentioned earlier, I'll be using this formula where L equals loadout cost and H equals helmet cost, and deaths are the number of deaths, and the cost is the resulting profit or loss of if you had ran a helmet. But in order to determine the loadout cost, I used the formula from the GitHub repo of the website Tarkov Gunsmith to calculate the likelihood that I would have died with a given helmet combination. So the data is sorted into two spreadsheets. We have the pre-hitbox changes spreadsheet with 100 deaths here recorded, and then the post-hitbox changes deaths, 100 deaths recorded here. So the idea is we have our loadout cost, well, our loadout name here, SF58, loadout cost, 766 rubles, 1,000 rubles. And you can see that that is recorded for each of the four loadouts, P90, HK, and MP7. And then under each of these are the deaths with that loadout. So, for example, this one we have a death to eyes, the eye hitbox, and we died by 5 by 39 PP. And then going up here, we can select any helmet and head armor combination we want. So, for example, if we have a masker here, right? And a masker face shield. Well, let's go back to our eyes column. This calculates that there was a 0% chance that I would have died to this round, which means that our loadout cost for that death, we go all the way over here, is 0 because I would have survived, right? But if I take off the face shield, then that changes it to 100% likelihood of dying, because the mask helmet itself without the face shield has no eye protection. And as you can see here, each part will, the coverage of each part will be shown here. And the resulting cost of your combination. So we had masker 134K at the moment with the helmet plus face shield, or any other combination you want. And shows the class and this is the key figure, the amount of rubles saved that you would have lost or gained or saved. So with this combination, we would have saved 12.2 million rubles. But you don't need to go through all of this because I've already done that over here. So here you can see for every combination that I could think of armor and face shields and stuff, we calculated the cost of that combination and then how much rubles I would have saved or lost. And then here in this column, you can see whether or not it would have blocked headset. This is important because my testing was ran with a headset. And so the most relevant data is going to be around helmet combinations that don't block, well, that allow you to run some sort of headset. So ideally, well, the best one would be the helmet combination that blocks no headsets at all. And then some would be, these would be second best. So for example, as you can see here, it's sorted by the highest cost to the most amount of money saved. And so we can see here the TC 2001 for post-patch hitbox changes at this cost would have saved me 5.4 mil, just over 5.4 mil, and it would have let me run a headset, any headset that I wanted. And then for headset combination that only blocks some headsets, then the Tor 2 with the Tor 2 face shield would have saved me 5.5 mil. And then for helmets that do block headsets, we can see all the data here. So, you can have a play around with it. You can change helmet costs as well if you want. Like if I gathered this data that's post. My post hitbox changes, I gather data on 23rd of 6. So if you want to update the costs, right, then you can update it in this column, and then you can update the costs here, and then put whatever combination in here to check against the data to see whether or not it would be like how good it would have been. And if you want to mess around with this yourself, just hit File, make a copy, and then you can save it to your drive and do with it what you will. Oh, and one limitation of the spreadsheet is that I can't figure out how to take into account overlapping head armors. So like, for example, if we have a Bastion and a Bastion armor plate, well, see how they're both covering head top and nape? I haven't been able to figure out how to calculate the fact that a bullet will be going through 2 different armors. Right now, the spreadsheet is only considering 1 armor class per hitbox. So if you can figure out how to include that, let me know. I would love to include it, but yeah, I'm stuck on that issue. So now for the final results. For the best helmet that doesn't block ears, pre-patch, is the TC 2001, which costed 40,000 rubles per unit and would have saved me 1,069,300 rubles. And post-patch is also the TC 2001, which costed 30,000 per unit and would have saved me 5.4,089,218 rubles. For helmets that block some ears, then pre-patch, the SSH steel helmet, which costs 24,000 per unit, would have saved me 588,693 rubles. And post-patch, the Tor 2, which costed 94,041 rubles, and would have saved me 5,568,338 rubles. And finally, for helmets that do block ears, pre-patch was the masker with the face shield at a cost of 116,724 rubles, and it would have saved me 9,888,008 rubles. Post-patch is the SHPM firefighter helmet at a cost of 38,000 per unit, and would have saved me 12,547,392. But I don't really take into account this last category because of the vision loss and hearing loss of these helmets. But it's interesting data regardless. Out of interest, I also calculated how many times I died to a hitbox that could have possibly been stopped by a helmet armor, by a head armor. And pre-patch, I died 55 times to either head, top, face, nape, ears, eyes, jaws, throat, neck, and post-patch was 58. So fairly consistent results across the board. So are these results actually useful for you? Are they applicable to your gameplay? Essentially, the closer your gameplay is to the variables in this experiment, the more the results will be applicable to you. So if you're running daytime factory, late white, solo, aggressive PMC raids, and you have over 10,000 hours of CQC PvP experience, then the results are highly applicable to you. I do only consider this to be a preliminary study. The results aren't definitive about whether or not helmets overall are worth running or not for Tarkov, for every map, for every playstyle, but it's a good foundation for further studies. And if this video generates enough interest, I'll do further testing next wipe. I'm especially interested to see if any helmet would be worth running on labs, as I've long believed that due to the higher quality of ammo in an average labs raid, it's not worth running any helmets except for an Alton or Rise, so I'd love to see if that belief has any validity.